that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, you're watching and listening to Andrew Pierce here on GB News. I'm with you until 2 o'clock. Here's what's coming up in the first hour. We've dodged a recession, but only just. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's been out and about today. He says we're not out of the woods yet. And Rishi Sunak will privately be thinking it's put Liz Truss back in her box. But is it really as good as it sounds? I'm talking to top economist. Turkey and Syria's deadly earthquakes, they've left devastation and desperation in equal measure. The death toll now rising above 21,000. We'll be getting the latest on that. And the search for missing mum, Nicola Bulley. Now the police say they've a new red van lead as the family launch a fresh appeal for information. Our reporter is there. We'll speak to her live. And ISIS bride Shamima Begum, she's back, sadly, and seems to be launching a celebrity-style campaign to be allowed to come back to Britain. We'll debate whether she should be allowed with Conservative commentator Emma Webb and Amnesty International. Joining me for the next hour will be the commentator and broadcaster Bushra Shrake. And remember that you at home are an important part of this show, so email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's what's coming up in this hour, but first, the latest news.
Good afternoon, it's just gone 12 o'clock. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rescue workers say the 72-hour golden period for finding survivors is closing following Monday's earthquakes in southern Turkey and northern Syria. The number of dead has now risen to over 21,000. But amongst the devastation, glimmers of hope. 4 days on, a 10-day-old baby has been rescued along with his mother. The pair spent more than 90 hours under the rubble before being freed. The World Health Organization warns the death toll is expected to rise still, with so many left without shelter from freezing conditions. Journalist Umut Tangor describes the situation as desperate.
People are sleeping outside the tents. There are some couple of tent city already established. There is no electricity right now in Hatay. There is no water in Hatay. People suffering with hunger. Seriously, they were asking us bread and water.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has visited a hospital in Aleppo in his first reported visit to the affected region. At least 3,000 people are known to have died in the country following the disaster. 14 aid trucks have arrived in northern Syria from Turkey as charities warn they're running out of supplies. Back here, the Chancellor has warned the UK isn't out of the woods yet. It's after the latest figures show the economy narrowly avoided falling into recession in the final quarter of last year. The data from the Office for National Statistics reveals the economy saw zero growth between October and December. The final month of 2022 saw GDP down by 0.5%. But overall, the annual GDP rate grew by 4.1%. Labour's called for urgent measures to be brought forward to help families with the cost of living crisis. The Chancellor's welcomed the figures but warns there's still more to be done.
The fact that we have avoided recession, in fact we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
Meanwhile, the Chancellor's also said today that there's no major new initiative to help those struggling with energy bills from April when the energy price guarantee rises. Bills for a typical household are set to increase from £2,500 to £3,000. The government's been under pressure to offer additional help for people to cope with soaring costs. It comes as the government says all energy companies will now follow rules preventing them from forcefully installing prepayment meters into homes. Ambulance service workers in England are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Around 15,000 staff are taking part in the walkout, with Unison members balloting another 10,000 over the coming weeks. The government says constructive talks are being held, but the unions accused it of sitting it out and not negotiating. University employees are also on strike for the second day this week as they continue their 48-hour walkout, with more than 70,000 staff at 150 universities taking action. Friends of Nicola Bulley have gathered for a second roadside appeal to mark 2 weeks since her disappearance. Lancashire Police says its search for the missing mother of two has moved towards the coast. The force says it's now searching further downstream where the River Wire becomes tidal. Ukraine's Prime Minister says Russia has launched more than 50 missiles at the country today. The capital's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, says 10 of those have been shot down over Kyiv. The attacks caused damage to power grids at 6 locations, but there are no confirmed casualties. Schools have been forced to evacuate and continue with their classes at an underground station. It comes as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is touring Europe as he aims to ramp up military aid for the war-torn country. And Ukraine's president will be addressing a UK-led summit today as well to discuss Russia's participation at next year's Olympics in Paris. It follows warnings his country could boycott the Games over the issue. The International Olympic Committee says it will explore a pathway for athletes from Russia and Belarus to compete as neutrals. The move has been criticised following the invasion of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to urge a summit of 30 nations to consider how to respond. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew Pearce.
Andrew Pearce here with you on GB News. Well, the UK economy flatlined in the last quarter of 2022, helping it to avoid a recession by the tiniest of margins. The Chancellor's been out and about welcoming the fact. This is what he had to say.
Well, the fact that we have avoided recession, in fact we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
Well, that's the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. Joining me in the studio for the next hour, I'm delighted to say, is Bushra Sheikh. He's a commentator and former contestant on BBC Apprentice, and the macroeconomist Philip Pilkington. He's in a denial, isn't he? We managed to avoid recession by the smallest of margins.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not even clear yet. I mean, these numbers are monthly numbers. They come out and they're often revised. So they may even be revised in March. But even if they're not, it's a flat economy. The economy really hasn't grown any larger than it was pre-pandemic. So it really looks like we're in a pretty stagnant environment. Yeah.
Front page of my newspaper today, the Daily Mail, it says, when will they get it on tax? Because we see AstraZeneca has announced they're going to invest £300 million, not in the UK as they intended to, but in Ireland, because Ireland's got lower taxes.
I mean, lowering the tax rate could certainly help, but at the moment, of course, the government's kind of in austerity mode. Interest rates are going up. They're trying to rein in spending and so on to try and control inflation. So it's quite difficult. I mean, when they did lower taxes with Liz Truss, you got a very negative market reaction. Maybe there's a different way of doing that, a better way of communicating it. I agree with you, it probably would help inward investment, but it's a tough situation.
The Chancellor, when he was running for the Tory leadership, Jeremy Hunt, said he would cut corporation tax from 19% by 5 or 6%. He is going to confirm in the budget in March that corporation tax is going to rise by 6% to 25%. That's going to drive even more companies like AstraZeneca to invest elsewhere rather than the UK, surely.
Yeah, correct. I mean, honestly, you know, when we think about what they actually said they were going to do versus what they're going to do now, it looks totally different for me. I mean, ultimately, for me, the main concern is that are they just trying to make people be hopeful about something? You know, we've got to be honest about this entire situation. We still have the cost of living crisis. It is very, very present here. If companies are going to go and invest elsewhere, what's that going to actually do for the economy in a wider spectrum? Is that going to drive the inflation down? Is it just going to mean that people are going to struggle? Because actually at the core of it, we're talking about the public. How are people really living? Struggling to pay your bills, not having enough food. We know that the standard of living for people is slipping away. We know this is the worst time for people ever. So for me, it's all about how is the economy going to suit and benefit the regular person?
And what of corporation tax, Philip? Labour will say, oh, that's a tax which just benefits rich corporations. But small companies, small shops, if they earn over £50,000 or have output over £50,000, they pay corporation tax.
No, that's right. I mean, I totally agree with the other guest. I mean, lowering corporation tax will help inward investment. It will help businesses get back on track. I don't see any immediate inflationary issues with lowering the corporation tax rate. The issue is that the government under Liz Truss got a very negative signal from the bond markets about further borrowing. And if you lower corporation tax rates without cutting spending or without raising other tax rates, you may get a similar negative signal. Again, I'll say there may be a way of doing it and messaging it in such a way to get it done, but I think that's why the government will be nervous.
Just finally, on in recession, we've avoided the recession just, but as you point out, figures often get revised and we may actually be in recession. It's just a technical phrase, isn't it? Because as Bushra says, the economy, we're still in the thick of the worst cost of living crisis for 40-odd years.
No, it really is, you know, looking over this technical issue. I mean, they're looking at 2 quarters of negative growth to call a recession. I think really we'll see a recession if layoffs start. I think that's the real signal. And where I'd actually watch that happening is the construction sector. Mortgage demand has been falling since the summer, so have house prices. There's a lot of concerns in markets right now that we might see that further deteriorate this year. And if that happened and the construction sector starts laying off workers, I think that's when we could actually have a recession.
Do you see any green shoots, to use a phrase by a famous chancellor, green shoots of recovery? Do you see any positive signs, Bushra?
There are positive signs, but they're very minuscule. They are so small right now. And the question that I actually was thinking about was that even let's say that they are going to, again, have another reading, and technically we are going to be in a recession, because right now we know these are just technicalities.
Yeah.
The UK economy, in comparison to other countries, we're far behind. And for example, if we are 10% behind, we're still going to play catch-up. So whatever we're going to do in the next year or so, we are always going to be behind economies that perhaps had a better plan during the lockdowns and during COVID.
Finally to you, Philip, the budget's coming up in March. What is the one thing you would do to try and kickstart this sluggish economy?
I don't think lowering corporation taxes is a bad plan. I think that could be actually a way forward. I think they should be very careful on energy costs. I think there's a lot of a sense that energy prices have come down. My bill's still pretty high. There's talk about getting rid of the energy price guarantee, or at least phasing it out. I think that's going to prove very difficult. It's also very expensive. But as I've said, I mean, the government really is boxed in on this budget. The markets are sort of calling the shots here at the moment.
Markets are running the country.
Kind of looks that way.
Thank you, Liz Truss, for that. Back and unrepentant this week, of course, wasn't she?
I didn't see him.
Yeah, 4,000-word article. Did you read it?
No.
Did you not?
No.
I actually read it, and the word I would use to describe her is deluded. Now, Philip, thank you for joining it. That's Philip Pilkington, macroeconomist. Now, more strikes, of course. Ambulance workers are staging strikes across England. The union strike today involves ambulance workers across 5 services in England, in Yorkshire, London, the South West, North East and the North West. Joining me now from London Waterloo Ambulance Station HQ is our reporter, Ray Addison. Ray, what's the latest from there?
Yes, hello there, Andrew. Yes, around 5,000 ambulance workers work out of stations in London. Now, we don't know how many are on strike today, although we do fear it could be a considerable number. Of course, the NHS advising people to only call 999 for an ambulance in a life-threatening situation. Speaking to workers here, they're telling me that it's not just a dispute about pay. Patient safety is key as well. Now, of course, in terms of patient safety, some are telling me stories of how they've been waiting to offload one patient at hospital, and the queues are so long that other calls are coming in. They don't have time they're not unable to respond to them because they haven't dropped off the first patient, and those patients then, in some cases, are sadly dying, and that's very demoralising. It's leading some people to leave the service. Of course, in terms of pay as well, some of the ambulance workers I've spoken to today are saying that they're being forced to use food banks as well, which is again leading to people leaving the service. Now, Sarah Gorton is Unison's head of safety, and she joins me now. Sarah, thanks very much for joining me. It's not just about pay, it's about patient safety.
This dispute is about pay and it's about staffing. So around this time last year, we asked the Health Minister, the Secretary of State at the time, and the Prime Minister to work with health unions to put together an urgent retention package to stop people leaving jobs in the NHS, because we know we've got over 100,000 vacancies. That means every single team of people working in jobs in the ambulance service, but working in jobs across the health service, is short of staff, and that situation isn't going to change unless the NHS can, yes, attract more people in, but primarily stop people leaving for better paid and less stressful work elsewhere.
Now, back in September, your members had a pay rise imposed on them of 4%, which was just over £1,000, around £1,400 for the average worker. Many of our viewers would think that's quite nice. They'd quite like a 4% pay rise. Why is it not enough?
Well, the £1,400 flat rate increase that was imposed after the pay review body process last year not only didn't go a very long way to meet the cost of living most health workers were experiencing, it was significantly below what was happening across the rest of the economy, so below private sector pay rises. And most importantly, other organisations, you'll have seen in retail and hospitality, people have been offering 2 or 3 pay rises in some cases throughout the year in order to help their workers through the cost of living crisis and to hang on to them. But most significantly, it's just not been enough to stop people leaving those jobs in the NHS. So pay is a lever that you use in order to give health organisations the chance to hang on to good people, and it simply isn't enough to be able to do that.
What's the morale like of your members at the moment?
So after seeing historic figures in December for the longest waits on record, the longest call response times, the longest that people have to wait in pain for an ambulance, that's why people are on picket lines, because they feel that they have to stand up not only for themselves and their families, but they have to stand up for the services and the patients that use them. You know, they're going home every day knowing that unnecessary harm is happening because of the state of staffing in the NHS.
What do you want to hear from the government? You haven't talked for a few weeks now. When are talks going to continue?
So we've had no proper formal talks. at all about pay, and that's what's so so difficult for members of the public to understand. I think why, if their number one priority, getting the health service back on track, if the public are saying that, and the Prime Minister is making it one of his priorities for the year, why are they not doing more to resolve this? As far as we can see, the strategy from the government is just to sit back and wait for this to play out. So this could be months. What we want to hear from the government is that they care enough about the health service, that they care enough about the public to talk to us, to find a way through this, to offer us meaningful talks, and we will gladly postpone the strikes, explore ways to resolve the dispute.
Sarah Gorton, Unison's Head of Health, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Well, obviously for Londoners today, it will be a concerning time for people around the rest of the country as well. 5 areas, 5 ambulance services taking industrial action today, their workers. And of course, the NHS urging people to only call 999 if it's a life-threatening situation.
All right, that's our reporter Ray Addison at the Waterloo ambulance depot. Bushra Sheikh, I hate to say this. Well, I don't hate to say it, I'm going to say it. I think the public have got to a point where it's almost strike fatigue. This has been going on for so long. The other day, it was the biggest strike in NHS's history, and I noticed on most of the major news bulletins it was about the 4th or 5th item.
Yeah. I mean, I think people get exhausted.
Yeah.
This is happening for a long time. It's so continuous. You know, the impact that it had initially, it's not having the same effect on people. Why? Because regular people do need to get to work. It's so disruptive as well. I understand why the strikes initially happened. I get that, and I get that people are struggling with the way their lives look. We've got inflation, all of these things combined. I get that. But also, I do question, if you are going to essentially get a pay rise at some point and then the economy tends to balance itself out, are you going to also give back that money and say, well, I don't need this extra money anymore? So you've got to look at it from both sides. It's not always just about wanting more.
And, of course, they're pushing for these double-digit pay rises, and we know inflation is almost certainly going to be down to 4 or 5% by the end of the year. So why would they get a 10 or 11% or 12% pay rise? Well, the nurses were up to 19%.
I know, it is bizarre. And I'm not one to sit here and say, don't strike, don't ask for more money. I'm not that individual. What I do know is that we need to come up with a solution, a cohesive solution that is going to work, because we cannot have strikes like this happening again. Honestly, I'm getting bored of it as well, and that's true.
Well, and I say power to the government's elbow in bringing forward this legislation to ensure a minimum level of cover in places like schools and the ambulance and the NHS.
Of course, we've got ambulances, we've got nurses. These are like crucial, critical services that we need for people. And if we keep having strikes like this, what's that going to look like?
Cleared blue water with Labour, of course, because they're opposing the strike legislation. That's Bushra Sheikh. She's with me here until 1 o'clock. Coming up after the short break, we're going to be getting the latest from Turkey as the search and rescue operation continues. The death toll now has reached 21,000. But now we're going to have a short break.
On GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television and online, across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Tomorrow at 8 p.m, tune in to a GB News Investigates documentary as we tell the full story of the grooming gang scandal.
My childhood had been stolen.
We will expose the cover-ups that have kept this national scandal under wraps for decades.
Not one person has been held accountable.
Our investigation uncovers the true scale of this outrage.
I want to see senior officials held legally to account.
On GB News, grooming gangs, Britain's shame.
Well, it's now estimated that more than 21,000 people have died after those 3 earthquakes in Turkey and Syria earlier this week. Aid workers in northern Syria are desperate for more aid. Meanwhile, 6 lorries carrying UN aid have crossed the border into northern Syria. Thousands of people are still trapped in rubble across the two countries, and there are still survivors being rescued after 90 hours of being stuck. Let's speak now to Sam Hewitt from the international disaster relief charity Shelterbox. Sam, this is turning into one of the worst disasters of modern times.
Indeed. I've been working as an aid worker for 10 years, and this is the biggest, if not one of the biggest, that I've been involved in. And this is also on top of a very long conflict that has been ongoing in Syria.
Sam, that's part of the problem as well, with getting aid to Syria, because the country, the government there isn't recognised by so many Western countries. Is that hampering the aid going into Syria?
That is one issue. The other issue is the fact that the earthquakes have damaged so much of the infrastructure. So, for example, in southern Turkey, one of the airports there, the runway has actually been split in two. I've seen pictures of railways which have been bent into a 90-degree angle.
Now, your charity, you're providing essential household items such as tarpaulin, stoves, clothes, solar lights. Have you managed to get much in already?
At the moment, we have a team in Turkey who are coordinating with the local authorities. We're trying to understand which of our suite of aid options that we have is most appropriate for the people who've been displaced. We're also in coordination with Syrian organisations in northern Syria to do the same and work out how we can best help those people who've been displaced by these earthquakes.
When disasters like this happen, Sam, the British public normally rally to the cause, and I know in most newspapers this week there have been full-page advertisements from aid charities appealing for support. Have you seen a lot of aid money coming in?
We are starting to see aid money coming in, and Shelterbox has launched an appeal, like many others, to enable us to scale up our response to this. We are aware that some aid is getting onto the ground, but this is a very, very big disaster. This is going to be going on for many weeks or months, and these people are going to need all the help that they can get.
What else can the public do?
I think the best thing to do is look for reputable charities such as Shelterbox. We have people and contacts on the ground. We've got the expertise to understand how to best use the resources we've got.
Bushra Sheikh, the public always rally around at these things. The British are pretty good at that. Do you think as a country, are we doing enough? The government, of course, has cut the international aid budget, something I support, actually. But when there's a crisis like this, the money is normally provided.
Yeah, I mean, you know what, there are two sides at the moment. We know what we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Muslims, we're talking about, like you said, a government in a country in Syria, which, you know, people are always questioning. I feel like we can do more as a community. I don't feel like we're doing enough, and I've been speaking to a few people as well, and there is this, like, apprehension of the wider community to give, and simply because they don't want to give to the people just because of news, just because of like different political issues that are happening at the moment. And I sincerely just want people to, if they've got any of those apprehensions, put them aside. This is about humanity. This is about people. This is houses have ruined. People have died. At the moment, it's 21,000. We know it's going to be in excess of that at some point. I certainly have been shocked by this, and it has left me the last 48 hours. I'll be honest with you. You know, I think it's the worst thing to happen to Turkey and Syria.
Sam, that's interesting. I was just saying how shocked she is seeing these images, and I guess also because it's Turkey as well. Lots of people know Turkey. They go there on holiday. They love Turkey. They've got to know it. In a sense, it brings the crisis closer to home.
Yes, it really does. And just going back to Bushra's point there about the humanity of it, in northern Syria, 75% of the people who need humanitarian assistance are women and children.
75% women and children. How difficult is that diplomatic tightrope, though, that governments have to walk with Syria, which we know has been the scene of one of the most appalling civil wars?
As an independent humanitarian organisation, our focus is trying to get as much aid, the right kind of aid, to the right people as best we can.
Bushra mentioned the death toll. It's 21,000. I read a report the other day, Sam, I don't know if you've got any evidence for that, saying it could go as high as 50,000.
I don't know whether it will reach that, but one of the things we're really concerned about is that although the earthquakes have happened, now so many people are exposed to the elements. It's really cold there, it's snowing, it's sub-zero temperatures. And without shelter, without electricity, without water, more people will die.
All right, Sam, well, it's grim, but thank you for the work your charity's doing. That's Sam Hewitt, who's from the disaster relief charity Shelter Box, and making the point it's getting very cold out there too, to make it even worse. Now, coming up after your news update, we'll have the latest on the disappearance of Nicola Bulley as a new lead has emerged. It's now 12:30, and I'm in the GB newsroom.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 12:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The President of Turkey, Erdogan, has admitted the earthquake response from officials isn't as fast as he wanted it to be, but that authorities will pay for the rents of people who don't want to stay in tents. It's as rescue workers say the golden period for finding survivors is now closing following Monday's earthquakes in southern Turkey and northern Syria. The death toll has now risen to more than 21,900. Amongst the devastation, though, glimmers of hope. 4 days on, a 10-day-old baby has been rescued along with his mother. The pair spent more than 90 hours under the rubble before being freed. In the UK, an appeal by the Disasters Emergency Committee has now raised more than £30 million in its first 24 hours, following donations from figures including the King and Queen Consort. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has visited a hospital in Aleppo in his first reported visit to the affected region. At least 3,000 people are known to have died in the country following the disaster. 14 aid trucks have arrived in northern Syria from Turkey as charities warn they're running out of supplies. And back here, the Chancellor's warned the UK isn't out of the woods yet after the latest figures show the economy narrowly avoided falling into recession in the final quarter of last year. The data from the Office for National Statistics reveals the economy saw zero growth between October and December. The final month of 2022 saw GDP down by 0.5%, but overall the annual GDP rate grew by 4.1%. The Chancellor's welcomed the figures but warns there's still more to be done.
Well, the fact that we have avoided recession, in fact, we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew will be back in just a moment.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're 2 weeks on and the police are still searching for missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley. The police are reportedly searching for what they call a tatty red van, believed to be a Renault, which was parked outside a barn close to where she went missing 2 weeks ago. Joining me live from Lancashire now is our reporter, Sophie Reaper. Sophie, what is the latest?
Well, it's been 2 weeks now since mother of two, Nicola Bulley, went missing while she was walking her dog Willow at a beauty spot here in St Michael's on Wyre. Now, this morning, Nicola's friends have gathered on Garstang Road, which is where I'm stood, in order to try and jog the memory of people driving past who may have also been driving past on the morning that Nicola went missing. Now, police say that the only exit from the area where Nicola was last seen to not have CCTV is here on the walkway that you may just be able to see over my left shoulder. So in order to negate the theory that Nicola may have exited that way, police have been appealing to some 700 drivers who they believe drove past that morning. Now, there's also a dispersal order currently here in St Michael's on Wyre, which gives police the power to act against anyone acting antisocially, people like members of the public who've been travelling all the way to St Michael's on Wyre to try and solve this mystery of where Nicola may have gone. Now, as we come into the weekend, the police's search continues. We know they're going to be somewhere called Shard Bridge in the next 30 minutes or so, continuing their search. That's about 7 miles away from St Michael's on Wyre. They're continuing their search of the river in the desperate hope that they can give some answers to Nicola's friends and family.
All right, that's Sophie Reaper with the latest. Bushra Sheikh still with me. You're a mum, Bushra. This is horrific. 2 young daughters, desperate to know where their mummy's gone.
Heartbreaking, heartbreaking. I can't even begin to imagine what the family's going through, what those children are going through. You know, just as a parent, I'm just thinking to myself, hey, how can this happen? All the unanswered questions. They've not found her. So many questions going on. I honestly, this is an absolute nightmare come true.
And for the family as well, because of the horrors on social media, these social media bullies posting all sorts of speculation about the family, adding almost to their misery. I mean, I wish they wouldn't read it, but people do.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's that's part and parcel of it all. You're going to get people that are totally supportive of it. They're going to try and help. They want to help. And you're going to get the other side of people that just make an absolute mockery of this situation. But it's heartbreaking. And just to think that there are all these unanswered questions. I mean, all of us, I believe, in the UK and even globally, if the story has gone this far, everybody is just wishing and hoping for the best.
Yeah, because it's just inexplicable that a mum can just disappear in broad daylight.
Oh, how can you explain that? I certainly believe she has been taken, she's been kidnapped, she's been abducted. All the signs point to that.
Well, let's hope the police find her, and we wish that family all the very best. Now, big story. You know who she is, the former ISIS bride, Shamima Begum. She's been in the headlines again after a BBC documentary about her life was aired this week. She was 15 when she left the UK to join the Islamic State. She's a refugee at a camp in northern Syria. She's been stripped of her British citizenship on national security grounds. She's challenging that decision, but should she be allowed to return to the UK to argue her case? Joining me now to discuss this is the political commentator Emma Webb, and I'm joined by Refugee and Asylums Right Director at Amnesty International, Steve Valdez-Simmons. Emma, let's start with you. I know lots of people have said they're going to cancel their BBC licence fee in protest of the 90-minute documentary, which also followed, I think it was a 10-part podcast about this woman.
The reason why people are angry at what the BBC has done in choosing to frame this podcast series and documentary the way they have, and also similarly towards Times Magazine for basically making Begum into a cover girl, is that there are many victims of Islamic State, Yazidis, people who were the victims of the state that Shamima Begum chose to go and be a part of. She chose to go and be part of that state-building enterprise. And she's being presented here as a victim. We're being asked to sympathise with her. And it seems to be as if it's part of some kind of PR campaign to make the public softer to the prospect of her coming back here, despite the fact that although we don't have all the information, we know that the government and the Home Secretary, particularly Sajid Javid, believe that there's sufficient evidence to suggest that she would pose a security risk to us here. So I think the public feel as if they are being asked to sympathise with somebody who isn't the victim and to put themselves in a situation that would frankly be dangerous.
Steve Valdez-Simmons, how do you argue against that? If the government's security advisors say she is potentially a security risk, how can we possibly let her back in the country?
Because she's British. We all know that. She was born here, born a British citizen, grew up here, lured to Syria from here, indeed by, it seems, an agent of an ally of this country. The fact is that whether she is dangerous or not, she may be, I do not know. Whether she has committed offences that should be prosecuted or not, that may well be the case. All of those things are matters that this country is responsible for in the sense that she is British, and therefore we should deal with that. We should not be in the business of exiling our nationals to other parts of the world. We should take responsibility and deal with any issues that there may be concerning that, as we would do with any other British citizen.
She committed the crimes in Syria. Why doesn't she stay there and face Syrian justice?
The issue is that she has been stripped of her British citizenship. There are real questions about the capacity of Syria to deliver justice for a whole host of reasons, which I'm sure are manifest. But it's certainly true that if British nationals commit offences in other countries, we have provisions for extraditing them under powers to those places if justice can be and should be delivered there. But what has happened here is our country has exiled one of its citizens by stripping her of citizenship. Also, by the way, as the Supreme Court held only a couple of years ago, effectively disabling her from being able to argue effectively her case about her nationality rights in front of a British court. That is the issue in question here.
Emma Webb, how do you respond to that?
The British government have a primary responsibility to the safety of the British people. And this is a woman who, even if she's 15, she's still a moral agent. She chose actively to go and join a terrorist organisation. I don't believe for a second what she suggested in the documentary, that she wasn't aware of the crimes of Islamic State. She chose to close her ears to them. I'm sorry, but the view, I think, of myself and the majority of the British public will be that actions have consequences. And the fact is that when people, foreign fighters, do return to the UK, it's extremely difficult to prosecute them. It's particularly difficult to prosecute female fighters or women who have gone to join Islamic State, particularly in hindsight, because it's very difficult to collect evidence from a war zone. So the chances of her actually seeing justice if she comes back to this country are slim to none. So I think that fundamentally, you're talking about responsibility here. We have to be pragmatic. If we can ever stop a terrorist or a foreign fighter from returning to this country, which we can do legally if someone has dual citizenship, as was the case with the dual citizen Jack Letts, who had Canadian citizenship as well, and he was stripped of his citizenship. If we have the ability to prevent somebody who is potentially dangerous from coming back to this country, and we have no idea what the nature of the security risk is, the primary responsibility of the British government is to the safety of its people.
And Steve Valdez-Simmons, if she comes back here and she's put in prison to await trial, how do we know she's not going to radicalise people in prison? Because we know people have been radicalised in prison.
Well, to be clear, I am not saying that I do know what would happen in that regard. Although,
well, aren't you worried about that?
I would assume. Well, please let me answer your question. I think all of the questions about issues of safety in relation to this British person are on their face real and need to be addressed. What I find so irresponsible, if we're going to use those terms, is the idea that this country thinks that it can divest itself of its responsibility for its own citizens, as if we would be, I don't know, would we be accepting of other countries exiling people to our territory because they were said to be a threat to their own state? It makes no sense whatsoever. This is a British person, and we should take our responsibilities in respect of our citizen. And if that involves the need to prosecute or consider security measures in respect of her, I do not know whether that is needed or not, but if it is, then that is something that we as a country should do.
All right, that's Emma Webb, and that was Steve Valdez-Simmons from Amnesty International UK. Bruce Sheikh, I don't think she should come back here. There's a very good reason. Would you want her living in your street? Or living next door to you?
Honestly, it's not about her coming and living next to me. This is about a policy that exists, number one, which is a discriminative policy that exists. If you have dual citizenship, you can be stripped of it. What about those people that don't? So that's a question mark. Then the other thing I think about is, what is our process? What is the process in the UK when something like this happens? Because at the moment, we're just singing off a sheet that doesn't really exist. We're just doing what we want. So when it comes to Shamima Begum, for me, she is she's British. She needs to come back and she needs to have a trial. So we need to understand, is she a victim or is she a criminal? And either way, we have a process that follows that. Right now, I just believe that she's being treated very unfairly.
And do you believe it's possible to de-radicalise her?
Absolutely. Look, we have so many criminals. We have a system here where, we don't want to be these individuals that say, I'm sorry, this is the way you are, we're just going to leave you alone. We want to get people rehabilitated. That is something that we should encourage in this country. Now, she is not something that happens every single day. She's not the rule. This is, we would understand that.
Yeah, quite, because this is a woman who allegedly sewed people into their suicide vests.
That's obviously an accusation, which she, if you've watched it, has said that's not something that she's done. So, and I get it. I believe as
she also said she was relaxed about seeing people's heads in a skip.
She's been programmed that way. We can't, bring her to the UK, get her psychoanalyzed, see a counsellor, and let's really question what's going on.
All right, as we say on this one will run and run. Now, an interesting economic story. It's used car sales in Britain slumped by nearly 9% last year, according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers. 6.9 million vehicles changed hands in 2022, down from 7.5 million in the previous 12 months. Well, joining me now is a friend of the show. He's the broadcaster and he's the car dealer, Danny Kelly. Danny, hard times.
Do you know what, Andrew? I'm not experiencing hard times at the moment. I'm finding that used car prices are going through the roof. So it's quite a counterintuitive story that car sales seems to have slowed down, which it has, and I'll go into detail why in a bit. But I was standing amongst the fumes at Northampton auction last week, inhaling all of the diesel and the petrol fumes, trying to buy cars, and I couldn't buy any cars because there's a real short supply. So I think it's linked with a short supply. So the fewer cars available to purchase, Andrew, obviously mean that the fewer cars are available to purchase from dealers like myself. The mini budget was disastrous. People now only turn to used cars if it's an essential purchase, rather than, say, a luxury, spontaneous purchase.
Do you think perhaps people are saving up, Danny, to buy an electric car for which they'll need a huge bank loan? Because what are they, £30,000 if you're lucky?
Well, do you know what? The news that makes a lot of petrol and diesel used car dealers like me feel rather smug about, because I wouldn't touch an electric used car with a barge pole, is that the big expensive, so the Jaguar, 50, 60, 70 grand Jaguars, the Teslas, 50, 60, 70 grand Teslas, they have plummeted by up to 15% year on year. Elon Musk, when he announced that the UK arm of Tesla was slashing the prices of new Teslas only 6 weeks ago by, say, 5, 6, 7 grand. Well, obviously, that had a disastrous effect on the used car prices with electric cars. Now, the electric car market is rather buoyant if you're dealing with little run-around town cars, 30, 45, 50 miles a day sort of material. But people, generally speaking, people have lost confidence in the ability to go from one side of the country to the other side of the country because of this range anxiety, which has been dismissed by a lot of electric car purists. But it's actually a fact. And the Sunday Mail exposed the gritty reality of this over Christmas, when there was a queue of 6 or 7 hours of Teslas all trying to get the 1 or 2 charging points at a service station in Cumbria. That's the gritty reality of owning an electric car at the moment, particularly if you have to drive from Cumbria to London to Cornwall.
All right, that's the broadcast and car dealer, Danny Kelly. Are you a car owner?
I am, yeah.
I've known a car for over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Have you got a hybrid and electric, or are you a gas-guzzling petrol diesel?
I'm a gas-guzzling petrol diesel, because, I've got the same apprehension. If I need to drive cross-country, I really, really would worry about not having enough electric, So I would have to stop in the middle, and it's just a nuisance for me, and that's why I don't go there.
And also particularly difficult, women driving on their own, or anybody driving on their own, if you break down in the middle of the countryside because you haven't got any energy.
Yeah, of course, and these are real.
We're talking about cars because the Taxi Charity is an organisation that helps veterans return to places like Normandy for commemorations. It's celebrating its 75th anniversary. Black taxi drivers are joining veterans in central London to mark this milestone. Our reporter, Lisa Hartle, went to meet one of the veterans who have been helped by this very, very deserving charity.
This was in 1944, just before D-Day. My parents insisted I go to a studio, photographic studio, to have a photograph taken. I think that was in case I didn't come back.
For veterans like Mervyn, the Taxi Charity provides a link to the past, a chance to return to places like Normandy for D-Day commemorations and pay their respects to fallen comrades.
It's a lot. I've been several times now, over a few years, but as I've always said, going there, it's being able to come back again, where so many of my comrades are still there. It brings it home, what could have been. More than it did at the time, actually. And we couldn't do it without the taxis. I don't think I could manage on the ferry or by air. Not anymore, anyway. I'm 98 now.
Mervyn was just 19 years old when he was first deployed during the Second World War. Serving with the Royal Army Ordnance Corps, he went into Normandy on D-Day, a treacherous trip, having lost comrades the day before when their boat was hit by a torpedo.
They heard the big shells going from our huge warships to the land and from the Germans back at the warships. Nobody bothered with me, thank goodness. They thought I wasn't worth bothering with. But it was very frightening, and it literally did get frightened. That's the first time I took out my book of Psalms and was reading them.
The Taxi Charity for Military Veterans is celebrating its 75th year. Run by London black taxi drivers, it's been supporting thousands of veterans since 1948.
We look after any veterans that need our help. We take them around the UK, and now, the last 10, 15 years, we've been taking them back to the Netherlands and to Normandy to pay respects to their fallen comrades who are still there. It gives them a chance to get to see their friends again. Only veterans understand what veterans think and how veterans feel. We as taxi drivers, and you and me, unless you've walked in their shoes, you have no idea how they feel and how they think. So for them to get back together again with their comrades, it means a lot to them. And as the years go by and they get fewer and fewer, it's more and more special for them.
Mervyn now writes poems to reflect on his time during the war.
I'll go again to Normandy, where I was once before, but then I was in uniform in June of '44.
The charity will be celebrating its anniversary with several events, raising money to ensure veterans like Mervyn can continue to pay their respects to those who never returned home.
I'm not a hero, despite the medals that I wear. They merely mean that these I have just prove that I was there.
Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
What a wonderful man he is. Let's go live to the Royal Air Force Club in London where Lisa Hartle is. Lisa.
Hello, yes, RAF Club. So this is a private members club for RAF officers and their families, but today they're welcoming 30 World War II veterans as well as other veterans to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the charity. So just to tell us more about the charity is Brian, who we saw in that package there. Hi, Brian.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
So just tell us a bit more about the charity and all the work that goes into fundraising.
Yes, certainly. So this is our 75th year as a charity, and we have to uniquely rely on donations, grants, generous people to fund what we try to do with our veterans throughout the UK. And what we've been trying to do the last 10 or 15 years is where we take them back to Europe, back to Normandy, back to the Netherlands, where they can pay their respects to fallen comrades. And we also take them around the UK. Last weekend we was at a function in London, nice old sing-along for them all. Also we make trips to Worthing and other places just so they can be together.
And you got all the taxi drivers here today. You all brought the veterans with you in today as well, didn't you?
Yes, we did. So we've all come from all over the southeast. I've come in from Essex and central London, and all the drivers. We brought in 30 veterans plus carers and guests. Yeah, it's been a very big effort, but we've all got here on time. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, interrupting that.
That's okay.
So there was a lovely story of how the charity first got started.
Yeah, so just after the Second World War in 1948, the charity was founded by 3 taxi drivers, and hence the name the Taxi Charity. And they decided back then that they were going to get veterans maybe once, twice, 3 times a year together, and one of their favourite places of going to was Worthing in Sussex. And funny enough, we're actually going back there this year for our 75th time. So it's something that we're really proud of. You know, as a charity, 75 years is a big thing. I don't know what charities, apart from us, have gone on for that long.
And obviously we saw in the package there Mervyn, and when we were talking to him the other day, he said that this means so much to him.
Yeah, I mean, Mervyn's a lovely, lovely man, and just like all the other veterans, it means so much. I mean, my guys there that I brought in, 294 years between the 3 of them, and they were just so happy to see each other. It's not a regular thing they do anymore. They can't do anymore, so they have to rely on us to get them where they want to go.
So 75 years, that's such a long time for the charity to be going. How are you celebrating today?
Well, today, Lisa, we're having a special function to celebrate 75 years, and also we're doing 75 for 75, this is like kicking off our campaign year. We're going to try and raise £75,000 for future events around the UK and Europe, where we can take veterans to events, to days out, back, like I said, back to the Netherlands and back to Normandy.
And aren't you going to be walking over a bridge or something?
Myself and my dear friend Simon, the treasurer, we're doing I think it's a 14-bridge charity walk in September, which is about 25 kilometres, and I'm hoping I get as many taxi drivers on board, and family and friends and veterans and anybody who wants to join us and sponsor us just to raise money.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Lisa. Thank you.
So as the day goes on, the veterans are going to be enjoying some lunch and then getting to chat with each other. So as we go on through the day, we'll be bringing you some stories and interviewing some more of the veterans.
All right, that's Lisa Hartle from the RAF Club. Final word from you, Bushra Sheikh. What a wonderful charity, and what a wonderful old boy he was.
I know, I just love it. 98 years old, wow, we wouldn't even know his secret.
And he says, I'm not a hero. He is.
He is, yeah, absolutely.
And it's so important, isn't it, that younger people know what these older men and women went through?
Oh, it's crucial. And you know what? Oh, they just teach us so much, so much.
Yeah, we've had them on the show before. That's because it's charity. Because they take another charity takes them to the cenotaph on Remembrance Day in November.
Oh gosh, you know what? I feel like the young people don't understand how much of their treasures for us, their gifts for us. You know what I mean? And
National treasures. That's Bushra Sheikh. I hope she's going to come and join me again. You're watching and listening to Andrew Pierce here on GB News. Plenty more to come still in the next hour of the programme. We're talking about another grim poll for the Tories, so don't go anywhere. But before that, we're going to have a very short break.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604. Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, you're watching and listening to Andrew Pierce here on GB News with you until 2 p.m. Here's what's coming up in the next hour. We'll be digesting the latest People's Poll. It's grim news yet again for Rishi Sunak's Tory party. The Conservatives were also crushed in a by-election yesterday in West Lancashire. Also, following Ukrainian President Zelensky's tour of European capitals, London was first, a diplomatic coup for Rishi Sunak. Should we be sending jets to the Ukraine? I'm going to be speaking to a former British Army general about this. And John Cleese, one of the great comedy writers of all time, has revealed the return of Fawlty Towers will not be on the BBC. Because it's too woke, of course. He revealed this in an interview on Dan Wootton's show, saying he would not have been given the freedom that he wanted. And a gender-neutral God? Has the Church of England finally lost the plot? I'll be talking about whether we should refer to the Lord's Prayer. I'm discussing this with the journalist Carol Malone, and also with me in the next hour is the political commentator and consultant Piers Pottinger. Don't forget, of course, you at home, an important part of this show, email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's what's coming up this next hour. But first, the latest news.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has admitted his country's response to Monday's devastating earthquakes isn't as fast as he wants it to be. Rescue workers say the golden period for finding survivors in the south of the country and northern Syria is now closing. The death toll has risen to more than 21,900 people. Amongst the devastation, though, glimmers of hope. 4 days on, a 10-day-old baby has been rescued along with his mother. The pair spent more than 90 hours under the rubble before being freed. In the UK, an appeal by the Disasters Emergency Committee has raised more than £30 million in its first 24 hours, following donations from high-profile figures, including the King and Queen Consort. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has visited a hospital in Aleppo in his first reported visit to the affected region. At least 3,000 people are known to have died in the country following the disaster. 14 aid trucks have arrived in northern Syria from Turkey as charities warn they're running out of supplies. Back here, the Chancellor's warned the UK isn't out of the woods yet. It's after the latest figures show the economy narrowly avoided falling into recession in the final quarter of last year. The data from the Office for National Statistics reveals the economy saw zero growth between October and December. The final month of 2022 saw GDP down by 0.5%. But overall, the annual GDP rate grew by 4.1%. Labour's called for urgent measures to be brought forward to help families with the cost of living crisis. The Chancellor's welcomed the figures but warns there's still more to be done.
The fact that we have avoided recession, in fact we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
The Chancellor says there's no major new initiative, meanwhile, to help those struggling with energy bills from April. That's when the energy price guarantee rises. Bills for a typical household are set to increase from £2,500 to £3,000. The government's been under pressure to offer additional help for people to cope with soaring costs. It comes as the government says energy suppliers have agreed to end the forced installation of prepayment meters in the homes of vulnerable customers. Ambulance service workers in England are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Around 15,000 staff are taking part in the walkout, with Unison members balloting another 10,000 over the coming weeks. The government says constructive talks are being held, but the unions accused it of sitting it out and not negotiating. University employees, meanwhile, are also on strike for the second day this week as they continue their 48-hour walkout, with more than 70,000 staff at 150 universities taking action. Friends of Nicola Bulley have gathered for a second roadside appeal to mark 2 weeks since her disappearance. Lancashire Police says its search for the missing mother of two has moved towards the coast. The force says it's now searching further downstream where the River Wire becomes tidal. Ukraine's Prime Minister says Russia has launched more than 50 missiles at the country today. The capital's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, says 10 have been shot down over Kyiv. The attack has caused damage to power grids at 6 locations, but there are no confirmed casualties. Schools have been forced to evacuate and continue with their classes underground. It comes as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been touring Europe as he aims to ramp up military aid for the war-torn country. Well, that as Ukraine's president will address a UK-led summit to discuss Russia's participation at next year's Olympics in Paris. It follows warnings his country could boycott the Games over the issue. The International Olympic Committee says it'll explore a pathway for athletes from Russia and Belarus to compete as neutrals. The move has been criticised following the invasion of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to urge a summit of 30 nations to consider how to respond. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew.
Well, welcome back to the show. It's that time of the week again. We can bring you the latest results of the GB News People's Poll. It's horrific for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. The Tories are on a mere 21%, Labour on on 50%, giving them a 29-point lead. This follows the West Lancashire by-election yesterday, where Labour won on a swing of 11%, albeit on a turnout of only 30%. And it also seems in that poll, can you believe this? Keir Starmer, who tried to force a second referendum on us after Brexit, Labour is now just as trusted to deliver on Brexit as the Tories. Let's go live to Westminster now, where our political reporter Olivia Utley can join us. Olivia, pretty damn bleak for the Tories.
It's very bleak indeed for the Conservatives, but the Conservatives' ratings have been bubbling around that mark for quite a long time now, quite a few months. So what Rishi Sunak can argue is that he's stabilised the Conservatives' poll ratings. The problem is he's stabilised them at a very low base indeed. To be seeing ratings this low for this long is pretty much unprecedented. What the Conservatives know that they have to do now is find a reason to get people out voting Conservative at the next general election. It's not enough to sort of rest on their laurels, because those poll ratings are just too low to have that. So what they've got to do is find some sort of route through on the economy. And what Jeremy Hunt has been doing the media rounds this morning has been arguing that thanks to government action we've managed to avoid a technical recession. Well, yes, his opponents in the Conservative Party would say that's all very well, but zero growth isn't exactly a reason to jump up and down and go out voting Conservative. This is a big problem for Rishi Sunak, because we still have that issue of whether to raise taxes, which is tearing apart the Conservative Party. On the one side, you've got the Conservative Growth Coalition, this caucus led by Liz Truss, as she's styling it, which says that lowering taxes is the only way to get people voting Conservative. It's the only way to promote real growth, not the sort of anemic growth that we've been seeing over the last few months. On the other side, we've got Rishi Sunak and the others who are more fiscally prudent in the party, who feel that the only way to cut inflation, which is, they believe, that the only way to get a good grounding for growth, is to continue raising taxes. And while that battle rages on within the Conservative Party, and the Liz Truss, those around her, gain momentum, it's going to be very hard to get those poll ratings any higher than we're seeing at the moment.
Olivia, how nervous now are backbench Tory MPs about whether they chose the right leader in Rishi Sunak? Because in that GB News poll, Boris Johnson, by a country mile, is the most popular of the three Prime Ministers we've had in the last 12 months. Just saying that shows how ridiculous the Tory party has become. 3 Prime Ministers in 12 months.
Absolutely, and it's certain that Tory MPs are getting more nervous. I mean, we've seen huge swathes of them saying that they're going to stand down at the next election. And what's quite interesting about some of the people who are standing down is it isn't the older people heading for retirement or people who haven't been in Parliament particularly long. There are plenty of young people on the very first rungs of the ministerial ladder. Deanna Davidson, for example, is saying that she's going to stand down. Someone like Nadine Dorris, who's only in sort of middle age, could expect another ministerial comeback. She's standing down at the next election. So backbenchers are certainly feeling very nervous indeed. And there are lots of them who are worried that their constituents, the sort of Tory voting, the shires, as it were, the Tory voting shires, are tax cutters at heart and just won't feel the need to go out and vote Conservative at the next election. They might not vote Labour, but they might not vote at all. And if we saw something like we saw in that West Lancashire by-election yesterday repeated across the country, I mean, of course, there are all the usual caveats about by-elections, but that would result in 424 seats for Labour and 138 for the Conservatives. That is a very bleak picture indeed. So certainly backbenchers are feeling pretty twitchy, and there are those who are beginning to coalesce around those former leaders, Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, who they believe have the charisma that might, just might, get people out voting Conservative.
Right, that's our political correspondent, Olivia Utley at Westminster. Joining me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, for until 2 o'clock, Piers Pottinger, public affairs expert. You've advised everything from British Aerospace, Diageo, Walmart, various British Prime Ministers, various members of the royal family. What would you say the Tories have to do, Piers, to turn this round? Because it does look like the Titanic is heading for the rocks.
It really does, yes. I mean, they're facing oblivion, quite frankly. And what they need to do is get ahead of the game. At the moment, all they're doing is reacting to the endless series of what are actually mostly very trivial problems, like seat belts, parking fines, party fines, whatever they are. They're not actually being seen to govern. And none of the departments seem to be landing any successes anywhere. And I think the last reshuffle was just tinkering around and actually increasing the cost. And I think one of the problems is that nothing is actually getting done that's going to change the populace in their view, quite rightly, that perhaps the Conservatives have been in power too long. It's time for a change, as Rod Stewart quite rightly said.
Yeah.
And they look tired. They don't seem to have any ideas. And the core voters are very disillusioned, I think. And the real danger is, of course, with the Lib Dems, a lot of people who can't bring themselves to vote for Labour, understandably, will vote Lib Dem. They could end up with 50, 60 seats at the next election if they then joined with Labour, who their own NEC, Labour, voted to endorse proportional representation in the future. If that comes, the Conservatives are finished forever.
Do you think, I mean, Rishi Sunak, he was chosen by Tory MPs, but Liz Truss, of course, won the first election. She's gone. Has Rishi Sunak, in your view, got what it takes? He's been there 100 days now. He was supposed to be very slick, very media-friendly, but he did that big speech at the beginning of the year. He talked about 5 pledges. I can hardly remember them.
I know. I think it's very disappointing. There's no doubt he's an intelligent man. There's no doubt he's got a lot of ability and he works hard. He's dedicated. But he doesn't seem to land any punches. And again, he's always reacting to stuff. He's never actually leading from the front. And I think it was very noticeable in PMQs this week when he and Starmer were talking about Ukraine at the dispatch box. For the first time, in my view, Starmer looked a man of substance, and he actually spoke with much more authority than Rishi, who just comes across as quite a nice chap, but rather lightweight.
Yeah. In that poll as well, I'm interested in your take on this because you advise Prince Andrew, and I quite know where he's going to end up soon, but in the poll, people think Prince Charles, the King, still odd calling him the King, isn't it?
Yes.
Has had a pretty good start. Do you think he has?
Absolutely. I think he's doing a marvellous job in very difficult circumstances. Having your own son rip into your own family just as you take over isn't much fun for anyone. But he's withstood that with great dignity and integrity, as you'd expect our monarch to do. He learnt a lot from his mother in that respect. But I think the problem he's got coming up with the coronation is, first of all, the coronation is a state occasion, which is very important to differentiate from a family affair.
Yeah.
And yet again, the spotlight will be on one person of his own making. So Prince Harry, whether he goes or not, I mean, this is the question that is hounding Charles right the way up to the coronation itself, which is sad.
You advised Prince Andrew. Will we see much of him at the coronation?
I doubt it. I did advise him a long time ago, yes. And I don't think he will play a part because, again, it's a state occasion and he has no real duties for the state anymore.
And just finally, the Brexit, and in this poll, astonishing, the Tories are no longer trusted to deliver Brexit. Labour are just as trusted. I mean, Brexit was this great opportunity. Have they blown it already on Brexit?
The thing is, when they say who's trusted to deliver Brexit, well, we've done Brexit, but we don't seem to have delivered much else. I mean, the real truth of the matter is that, I mean, where are all the benefits that were trumpeted by Boris as well, don't forget. I mean, Boris was that led Brexit, and all these wonderful promises he made, we haven't seen a glimmer of any of them.
Do you think there's even a remote chance he could be leading the Tories into the next general election, Boris Johnson?
I don't. I think he might want to, but I think because of the way he ended up having to be removed from office, I cannot really see him coming back. And I don't think the MPs who are left will be that keen on it either.
All right, that's Piers Pottinger. He's staying with me until 2 o'clock. Now, the Prince and Princess of Wales, they surprised local residents in Falmouth when they made their first joint engagement as the new Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. Their Royal Highnesses learnt about the region's maritime heritage. They met Cornwall's next generation of talented sports stars. Our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, was there to see it all.
Cornwall's a county with ancient links to royalty. Now, a new generation watches over 52,000 hectares of English land. Prince William is now responsible for the Duchy of Cornwall, providing an income for his family worth millions of pounds each year. Prince William will want to make a positive difference to communities here. He and Princess Catherine visited the National Maritime Museum of Cornwall yesterday to learn more about its coastal heritage, including royal heritage from a 14-foot dinghy called Kiwi. Presented to the late Queen and Prince Philip as a wedding present from New Zealand's Navy, the Duke and Duchess met volunteers like Phil, working on its refurbishment.
I think it was the Sea Scouts had built it in New Zealand, and they then gave it to Prince Philip, which he sailed a few times while he was down there.
The King has passed his duchy knowledge on to his son, who in turn spends time with students developing seaworthy skills from generations gone by. And then this, Princess Catherine reunited with her former school teacher, who now volunteers at the museum, a window to her past. But it's the future that featured heavily on this visit. William and Catherine met Daisy, a gifted pentathlete who received funding from Youth and Talented Cornwall. With support, she's hoping to one day compete in the Olympics for Great Britain.
Without the funding, I wouldn't be able to travel. So since we're in Cornwall, there's nothing down here. So travelling up to Redditch, it's camp every month where I get trained by elitist coaches.
Poppy, a talented dinghy sailor, also received funding and met the royal couple.
They're both really nice to talk to and friendly and opening. And I think they're both into the outdoors a lot as well, and think it's really good for your mental health, and definitely encourage lots of people to do it.
With new titles comes new responsibility. Not everyone was pleased to see them. An anti-monarchy protester was led away by police. The prince is expected to return to Cornwall many times as heir to the throne, making sure the duchy does provide meaningful value to the locals he now serves. Cameron Walker, GB News, Falmouth.
Piers Pottinger, the Duchess of Cornwall, the Princess of Wales, she's one of the great stars of the royal family, isn't she?
Oh, fantastic. There's no doubt about it. She always looks immaculate. She's got a lovely, genuine smile. It comes across as, you know, really... She comes across as a fabulous role model for a young mother of 3 children.
Yeah.
And she is, I think, absolutely marvellous.
And interesting, Cameron making the point they're going to go to Cornwall a lot. Of course, there are MPs in Sussex saying, oi, we don't want Harry and Meghan to be the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, so they've only been probably once, and they're unlikely to go again. Would it just stir up a hornet's nest if they were stripped of the titles?
I think it would. I mean, I think stripping your son of titles is a little tricky. But, I mean, if they eventually see sense, those two, they might just realise that using it is quite embarrassing for them. But, of course, in America, where they earn all their money, those titles are very important.
Yeah.
Because as time goes on, I don't think Harry can complain about the world, all his friends, his whole life, and how miserable it's been in his multi-million-dollar chateau in California for too much longer, because even the Americans, I think, are getting bored with it.
They certainly are.
And I think it, you know, and it's just a pity that he uses every opportunity to pull publicity stunts when technically he wants his privacy.
Yes, he wants his privacy, doesn't he? That's right. I forgot that, Prince Harry. That's Piers Pottinger. Now, coming up, we're going to be talking about sending jets to Ukraine. Should we, is the question. And a John Cleese exclusive. He's revealed to GB News he's not going to let the BBC screen the new series of 40 Towers. I'm not sure there should be one, really, at all. The first one was so brilliant. But before that, time for a short break.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update. Not much rain around this weekend, not a huge amount of sunshine either. It will be fairly cloudy, but for most of us it'll be a bit warmer than it has been for much of this week. Here's the reason for the dry weather, a big area of high pressure. But notice the isobars closely packed together across the north. It is very windy out there at the moment, and this weather front is still bringing some outbreaks of rain to the highlands of Scotland. That'll last for much of the evening. Still very gusty as well over northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. The winds will slowly ease through the night. Further south, the winds are light. We could see a bit of mist and fog, but generally this cloud keeping the temperatures up well above freezing. Will start the weekend at some 6s and 7s for most. So, as I said, much milder than many a morning has been this week. It will be a fairly grey day tomorrow, lots of cloud. We may continue to see some light rain and drizzle here and there, the hills of Wales, some western coasts, the highlands of Scotland, but for most it will be dry. And we should see something a bit brighter as well as the day goes on, the cloud breaking a little bit to reveal a little bit of blue sky here and there. And it will be quite mild for February, 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 degrees Celsius. Not a great deal of change during Saturday night. So if you're heading out, dry and predominantly cloudy, keeping things reasonably mild. Any breaks in the cloud could again allow temperatures to dip maybe close to freezing. And the thick cloud in the northwest of Scotland, where there will still be a brisk breeze blowing, may produce the odd spot of drizzly rain as we go into Sunday. But for most, again, the wind's light on Sunday, so lighter than today, and just a lot of cloud around, certainly over central and eastern parts further west and across parts of Scotland. Better chance on Sunday of seeing some longer spells of sunshine. And again, it will be on the mild side with temperatures mostly 9 to 11 degrees Celsius. That's all from me for now. Goodbye.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's action man, isn't he? The Ukrainian President Zelensky, he's been touring Europe this week. He's trying to get Europe to come up with fighter jets and more weapons. Some concern in Westminster, though, that the Ukraine may use British-made missiles to hit Russian targets in Crimea. Moldova has summoned the Russian ambassador after a missile crossed their airspace. It's all getting very hairy. Joining me on the show now is General Sir Richard Barrons, who's a former commander, Joint Forces. General Sir Richard, we've given them tanks. We were the first country to do that, but it's never quite enough for Zelensky, is it? He wants planes to protect the tanks. Should we give them to him?
So President Zelensky needs a full set of modern combat weapons in order to defeat the Russian occupation of his country. And tanks are an important part of this, but he needs an air force to keep the Russian air force off the back of his own army and his people. And he needs an air force in order to target the Russian forces in Ukraine. And the concern, as you've outlined, is if you give Ukraine fast jets, which are very fast and have long range, the temptation would be there to go into Russia with terrible consequences for an escalation in the war. But let's be clear, for Ukraine to win this war, to take its country back, it is going to need an air force.
And the current Ukrainian Air Force is lagging way behind the Russians.
So it has some very good equipment, MiG-29, for example, but Russian-made, but it doesn't have enough of them. And now it's got, I think, pilots or trainable pilots without airframes to fly. And essentially what Ukraine is asking for is about 2 squadrons. So let's say 24 modern fast jets, which would give them the edge they need to take over the airspace from the Russian Air Force. So it's quite a modest ask. The problem is transferring to a modern NATO aircraft, even if you're a skilled pilot, is at least 6 months and more like a year's work, and no one's started yet.
What of British long-range missiles, Sir Richard? Should we even be considering providing those to Ukraine?
So we've already given Ukraine quite long-range missiles, so things that have a range of about 50 miles or so, and what they'll be given now would have a range, depending on what they're launched from, of maybe 150 miles. And I think the key point is that gives Ukraine the ability to hit Russian military targets in occupied parts of Ukraine, including Crimea and the Donbass. I'm sure that the terms of giving these missiles will include not firing them into Russia, because one of the cardinal points of this war from day one is that it is not to become a war between Russia and NATO in terms of fighting, even if that's how Russia already defines it.
In his speeches this week, the President talked about how Ukraine will win. But what is victory, Sir Richard? Because if they don't get the Crimea back, which was annexed in 2014, long before this current war, can that really be a victory for the Ukrainian people? They're going to want all their territory restored.
So you raise a really interesting question, because no one has defined victory yet. And in some ways, that's a good thing, because no one knows how this is going to turn out, and you really don't want to define something that in the end you can never achieve. The most likely outcome, given the balance of forces now between Russia as it improves and rearms and Ukraine as long as it is supported by the West, will in the end be some sort of stalemate where it is possible more or less territory has been liberated, but the two sides will be locked in a dispute. So in the end, victory, I think, will be defined by when both sides reach a point of exhaustion and have to make the best of it.
Right, that's Sir Richard Barrons, who's a former Commander, Joint Forces Command. Piers Pottinger, he is a remarkable man, Zelensky. He is charismatic, he wows people wherever he goes. Who's advising him?
Well, I don't know. But I think his wife is also really rather impressive. I think both of them have done an amazing job. And actually, you know, he's a leader. He leads. Even though he's a very small chap, he's even smaller than Rishi.
Yeah.
He has authority. He has presence. And of course, he was an entertainer, a comedian. And he's used to dealing with difficult questions like heckling.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the most important thing for his country in its history, effectively. And he is leading with such dignity and authority. And I'm just sad that some countries in Europe and, of course, in the US, some of the Republicans even in the US, are not supporting him in the way that he should be getting. Because all credit to Boris, this is one thing he got absolutely right, and he stood up and he was... I mean, Boris looked like a leader when he was with Zelensky. And Zelensky is a deeply impressive man who I think, you know, we should be giving him everything he needs.
I think you're right. And of course, he did say this week that he's constantly having to convince Germany to support Ukraine. That's Piers Pottinger. He's with me until 2 o'clock. Coming up after your news update, we'll be talking about how the Church of England has finally lost the plot, in my view, because it may start referring to God in gender-neutral terms. You couldn't make it up. We're going to go to the headlines now with Rihanna.
Thank you, Andrew. It's 1:31. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has admitted his country's response to Monday's devastating earthquakes isn't as fast as he wants it to be. Rescue workers say the golden period for finding survivors in the south of the country and northern Syria is closing. The death toll has now risen to more than 21,900. Amongst the devastation, though, a glimmer of hope 4 days on. A 10-day-old baby has been rescued along with his mother. Back here, an appeal by the UK's Disasters Emergency Committee has raised more than £30 million in its first 24 hours. Meanwhile, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has visited a hospital in Aleppo in his first reported visit to the affected region. At least 3,000 people are known to have died in the country following the disaster. 14 aid trucks have arrived in northern Syria from Turkey as charities warn they're running out of supplies. The Chancellor has warned the UK isn't out of the woods yet. It's after the latest figures show the economy narrowly avoided falling into recession in the final quarter of last year. The data from the Office for National Statistics reveals the economy saw zero growth between October and December. The final month of 2022 saw GDP down by 0.5%. But overall, the annual GDP rate grew by 4.1%. The Chancellor's welcomed the figures, but warns there's still more to be done.
Well, the fact that we have avoided recession, in fact, we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Andrew will be back shortly. Don't go anywhere.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, the Church of England, get this, is considering gender-neutral terms for God. Priests are questioning the use of the word he when referring to God. The General Synod of the Church has said that changes are not looming, but they're exploring the idea of adopting a new language in the coming years. How utterly ridiculous. Joining me now to discuss this on the show is Dr Gavin Ashenden, who's a former chaplain to Queen Elizabeth, and also Carol Malone, the broadcaster and journalist. Hello to you both. If I can go to you first, to give the church side, Gavin, if I can call you by your first name, is this another sign that the Church of England is walking its way into irrelevance?
Yes, it is, Andrew. One of Jesus' more famous sayings is you can't serve two masters. He chose God and mammon, but in this case, it's God or the culture. So what the Church of England has found itself doing, as so many organisations have, is trying to fit in with the culture in order to please people. But that's not the role of the Church, and ultimately it will lose all credibility. It's really rather tragic.
Carol Malone, I imagine this will be featuring in your column in the Daily Express tomorrow. What do you make of it?
Piers, I can barely hear you. Say that question again.
I'm saying, I imagine this will be featuring in your column in the Daily Express tomorrow. Are you going to be giving the Church of England a rocket?
I've kind of written about it already because it kind of came out on Wednesday, so I was really upset about it. I cannot believe that they're thinking of, this is an aberration, thinking of changing the Lord's Prayer. If, we know that the Church of England, we know that the congregations are dwindling by the second, and if they think this is going to bring more in, they're really kidding themselves. This is insulting to traditionalists. For a start, I don't think it's ever going to get through on a vote with the Synod. I think they're going to throw it out. And who are they doing this for? I suspect it's a handful of vicars who are trying to be inclusive, when in fact they're trying to please a minority and they're upsetting the majority in doing that. This will drive people away.
So the plan is, or what they're considering is changing the most famous prayer of all, Our Father who art in heaven. They're not going to call him Father, they're going to call it something else. What are they going to say? Our Parent who art in heaven? Carol?
Whoever. Are they, are them. And that's the nonsense of this. It's, people, and I'm sure you will agree with this, that you can call God whatever you want. God in itself is a gender-neutral term. People can think of God and see God however they want, but we shouldn't be dictated to try and please a number of people and changing ancient prayers, changing the wording in the Bible. I mean, it's ridiculous.
What do you say, Gavin Ashenden, to your fellow churchmen and women who are advocating this? Because Carol Malone is right, isn't she? Church attendance is not dwindling, it's collapsing. And in the last census, for the first time, the number of people identifying as a Christian fell below 50% for the first time.
I think there are three things you can say to them. First of all, stop having double standards. Father, he is God's preferred pronoun. If you're so keen on giving everyone their preferred pronoun, you might at least allow God his. Secondly, I think I'd say that language matters. If you call God they, you're into polytheism. Language changes the belief structure that you have. And thirdly, I think I'd say get with Christianity and not with a form of cultural therapy, which is what you're practicing. The Church is one of the few organisations that has the antidote to offer some sanity to a very confused society. And it's a terrible irresponsibility to throw the gift of sanity and coherence away, as they're doing, in order to be popular.
Do you think the Archbishop of Canterbury should have made a stand here? He's the leader of the Church of... Well, no, the Queen is the leader of the Church of England, but he is our spiritual leader, and he's the leader of the Anglican faith worldwide. Shouldn't he have made a stand here?
Yes, he should, but he's gone. He's woke. He's been woke for some time. I don't know how...
So true!
Carol Malone, join in. Is he too woke, the Archbishop of Canterbury?
The idea that Justin Welby would oppose this is beyond ludicrous. I'm amazed he wasn't the one who suggested it. But, what would really interest me, and Gavin, you may know this, I don't know how many churchmen, how many vicars actually are advocating for this, because I suspect it's not very many, because the people in the church must realise exactly what we've just been saying, that congregations are dwindling, and the congregations are mainly made of traditionalists, and they are going to be furious at this tinkering with God. God, the idea that, in my God, I'm a Catholic, Jesus died on the cross, that was very definitely a man for me. And to most people, God is a man. And to try and mess about with that, to appease a handful of other people, just seems insanity to me.
Gavin, what of the idea? We know that Jesus died on the cross. He was a man. We've got the Holy Trinity, God the Father, God the Son and God the Holy Spirit. Should we have a woman in there somewhere?
Well, like Carol, I've become a Catholic. I gave up on the Anglicans. We have a woman. She's Mary. The model of Jesus and Mary is enormously profound and has enriched human culture. But the critical thing here, there are two issues I think we have to remember. One is that we don't make God in our own image. We can't conceive God. And so it's certainly true that when philosophers warn us not to impose our projections onto the universe. But the other is that God makes us in his image. He's busy remaking us in the way he intended us to be. And we need to accept our biology and the morality he gave us in order to flourish. Our society isn't flourishing. And one of the reasons is because we've rejected the way that God intended us to be able to flourish.
Carol, last word to you, finally. If you got a chance to talk to Justin Welby, what would you say?
Then is going to bring more people into the church is beyond ridiculous. But Piers, before I go, have you mentioned to everyone it's your birthday today?
No, I haven't, and thank you for mentioning that.
You haven't? I think you ought to tell the world how old you are, because you're ancient now.
Not as old as you, though, Carol, that's for sure. Certainly younger than you, and I look younger too, but thank you for mentioning it. That is Carol Malone, the broadcaster and columnist in the Daily Express, and Gavin Ashenden, a former chaplain to the Queen. And doesn't that say it all? He's left the Church of England to join the Roman Catholic faith, which is my faith and Carol's faith. Unbelievable, Piers Pottinger, isn't it? The PR mistakes this church continues to make.
Well, again, it's a question of leadership. They don't have any, really, because Justin Welby spent most of the lockdown, again, telling the world about his own problems and his own misery, rather than leading his flock at a time of when they most needed it. And I think the Church of England's behaviour during lockdown was extremely poor. And
because they shut them down.
They shut down. They shut the churches. There was no real pastoral care from the leader, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he picks issues that are actually irrelevant to his church. He should be promoting his faith. He should be bringing more people into the congregations. He should be leading the church, but he is completely failing to do so. And this is an example of utter nonsense. And people have got to stand up to this nonsense rather than spend hours and hours and sometimes lots of money debating it, discussing it, looking into it. When it's wokery, and it's mad wokery, it needs to be stamped out.
Couldn't agree more. Now, are you a fan of Scotch whisky? Because global exports of the stuff grew to more than £6 billion for the first time in 2022. That's according to figures released by the Scotch Whisky Association. The value of exports was up 37% to £6.2 billion. And the number of bottles exported also grew by 21% to the equivalent of £1.7 billion. We're going to be talking about that after the break. I mean, in fact, we're going to talk about it now, actually, because joining me on the show is Becky Paskin, who's a spirits writer, and she's the founder of Our Whisky, plus Brian Monteith, who's a columnist at The Scotsman and a former MSP, and I know Piers Pottinger wants to get in on the act because he's a very proud Scot. To you first, Becky, how important is Scotch whisky? Is it one of our most important drinks, would you say, in the UK?
100%. It's the most exported food and drink item from the UK. And as you've just mentioned, it's now worth over £6 billion in exports. And that has a huge knock-on effect to generating wealth for the economy, but also supporting local communities, environments. It creates jobs. It's a massive worldwide success story. And the results today are just a fantastic example of the way that Scotch whisky is really just enjoyed around the world.
Now, Becky, I think you've been told, we've got some whisky here in the studio. I think you've been told what it is. Here it is in front of me. Piers Pottinger is going to do the honours here and pour it. I notice there's no ice, Becky. Is that right? Should there be no ice with the whisky?
Well, you can have ice. I think whisky, particularly Scotch whisky, I'm pouring myself a glass as well, so I can join in with you. It's one of these drinks which has been shrouded in so many rules and regulations about how you should drink it, when really it's your drink, so you should drink it however you like. There is no right or wrong way to do it. So the one you've got today is just neat in the glass. I would always suggest tasting whiskey neat, and then if you want to add a few drops of water if you need to reduce some of the alcohol, then please go ahead. But if you fancy a glass of ice, a piece of ice in there, then go for it, add ice. But
well, look, we're going to try it now, Piers and I. We put some water in it because I have to tell you, Becky, I can't stand whiskey. Here we go.
Well, take it one sip at a time. I'd recommend you smell it first rather than dive straight in.
If I smell it, I think I'll be sick. That is absolutely revolting. Becky, I'm afraid it's taking me back to when I was about 20 and I drank whiskey and I threw up very badly, and I've never forgotten how grim I felt.
It's the water of life.
You know, that's really common. There seems to be a lot of people feel that way about coming to whiskey for the first time since they had a bad experience as a young person. My advice would always be to nose it very gently, just take in the aromas and then give it a small sip at a time. And don't forget, you can add a mixer as well. So there's nothing wrong with adding Coke, especially to single malts. Absolutely delicious.
Now, Brian Monteith, let's bring you into this conversation because you know that the Scottish Government, led by Nicola Sturgeon, whose popularity seems to be plummeting even faster than Rishi Sunak's, is trying to bring in a ban on advertising whiskey. How damaging would that be for a very, very important industry north of the border?
Well, it'd be an act of self-harm for the Scottish economy, for the British economy, and it is a suppression of commercial trade and freedom of speech. The key thing about advertising is that it allows you to introduce new brands, new drinks. And of course, if you don't like whiskey, you may like Scottish gin, because Scotland also produces the majority of British gin and exports it. But how could we have craft gins or malt whiskies come about, which never used to be as popular as they are now, without advertising, introducing them to us? So to suppress advertising is to suppress communication and allow us to make decisions about what we want to buy.
Now, Sturgeon is saying she wants to do this because she says, I'm using her words, Scotland has a troubled relationship with alcohol. And she's got a point here, hasn't she, Brian, in that Scotland, there's more people with drink problems, perceived drink problems, north of the border than any other part of the UK.
Well, that's true, and it's been true for a very long time. And there may be, I suspect, real cultural reasons for that, because what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that the Scottish Parliament intervened on a number of occasions. There's no supermarket promotions allowed now. There's no happy hours in Scotland. We have minimum pricing. And you know what? They've brought all those things in, and it's got worse. It's actually, there's evidence actually to show that some young people have switched to drugs because it's cheaper than the prices set by Nicola Sturgeon's laws. So the difficulty is that we need to change cultural attitudes about getting drunk and worshipping alcohol rather than restricting supply and people buying it, because the majority of people, the overwhelming majority of people, actually drink in moderation.
Let's bring Piers Possenger into this conversation, because one of your many hats you've worn, Piers, is to do with the liver.
Yeah, I was chairman of the Foundation for Liver Research. And actually, again, everyone thinks that liver disease is all to do with alcohol, when in fact a fatty liver is perhaps the biggest cause. I mean, a digestive biscuit can cause just as much damage to your liver as a glass of whiskey. But to go back to the point in Scotland, I mean, as a Scot and a proud Scot, I am ashamed of Nicola Sturgeon. What she's done to our country is absolutely appalling. All she does is direct poison towards Westminster in an asinine way. And here's another piece of legislation she's going to introduce, which is crazy, as it's been said, attacking Scotland's most famous industry. Is just nonsense. It also, she's backtracking already, yet again, because they were going to stop distilleries putting their name in front of it. Now they're saying, oh no, they can still say it's a distillery. I mean, what nonsense! And you know, this kind of, I mean, everything in Scotland, from education, health, the economy, is going backwards, is doing really badly under Sturgeon, and all she does is get involved in the most nonsensical stuff like this.
Yep. Becky Pasky, let's bring you final word on this. What is your favourite whiskey?
Oh, well, it's whichever one you're buying me, to be honest.
Good
on
answer.
a note on the advertising ban, I think it's really just we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot by banning all the alcohol advertising in its current format. The reason for this is the alcohol industry, particularly Scotch whisky, it recognises the position it's in, and it wants to really try and get a responsible drinking message across. Now, if you're banning them from even speaking to the public, you're cutting off your own foot here, because the government really should be using these companies to get that safe and responsible message across. We talk about Scotch whisky being a really successful export story, but if we're not supporting the industry at home in the domestic market, then we're going to see a lot less choice. And particularly, this might come in around the same time as the disastrous deposit return scheme, which is threatening to close hundreds of businesses across Scotland as it stands. I think it couldn't be worse timing.
All right, that's Becky Pasking and Brian Monteith. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm afraid the whiskey hasn't got any better, I'm afraid. If it had been gin, that would have been fine, beers, or vodka maybe. Now, John Cleese, the comedy legend that he is, has revealed to GB News that he won't allow the BBC to screen the new series of Fawlty Towers. Castle Rock Entertainment announced this week it had secured a deal with Cleese to bring back that epic, iconic comedy. But in a revelation in an interview with our very own Dan Wootton on GB News, the actor, comedian and writer said he'd be finding a new home for the sequel. Well, let's have a quick look at what he had to say to us.
Oh, because you wouldn't get the freedom. You see, I was terribly lucky, Dan. I was working for the BBC in the late 60s, 70s, beginning of the 80s. That was the best time because the BBC was run by people with real personality who loved the medium, and they were operating out of confidence, which was okay because there wasn't so much competition in these days. Then John Burt came in and said, if we don't match the listening or viewing figures that the commercial channels are getting, we'll get our license revoked. So then they started going for the biggest audiences, and they tended to go for the lowest common denominator, while always denying that they were doing.
The legend that is John Cleese. Piers Pottinger, because John Cleese is about to have a show here on GB News.
I know,
Thrilled
yeah.
to say it,
Yeah,
absolutely.
looking forward to it.
A great coup for GB News. I'm not sure he should be redoing Fawlty Towers, because part of its joy and part of its magic is there were only 12 episodes.
Yeah, and I think I know every line of every episode. I think most people do.
Don't mention the war.
I know, and well, you can't now because the BBC have taken all the German stuff out.
Of course they have.
As they would do.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very dangerous thing to try and to revisit after so long something that was really probably the ultimate situation comedy series. It was short, it was brilliantly constructed as half an hour of pure farce, fabulously acted by an amazing cast. Now to transform it, as I believe they're doing, to the tropics and have a new kind of... It's all a bit White Lotus-y. Right. It's all a bit... and also Cleese is, bless him, 83. And half the joy of Fawlty Towers was the manic Basil running around doing all kinds of physical comedy, which I would have thought he would struggle with now. And also, trying to repeat a great success is always very, very difficult. Very few people can do it.
And the great rapport with Prunella Scales, who was his wife on screen, and of course his own wife, Connie Booth, who was his real wife, worked, and of course Manuel, played by Andrew Sachs. But he's the only one now who's going to be in the remake.
Absolutely. John's the only one alive or capable of performing. Sadly, Prunella has Alzheimer's, as I think people know. You know, it's a big risk for him, and the critics will be chomping at the bit to rip him to shreds, which he won't like, quite rightly. And, I mean, I would love it to be a success, because we need a bright, buzzy, fun comedy with, you know, brilliantly done. But I just wonder, will it still have those values that the old comedy did.
One thing you can be certain of, there'll be a huge audience for the first episode.
Oh, absolutely. Well, including me and you, I'm sure.
I'll be glued to it.
Yeah.
And of course, we're looking forward to John Cleese joining us here on the GB News team sheet. That will be announced soon when he's coming on. I'll be back with you, of course, next Friday from 12 till 2. But don't go anywhere, though, because up next, it's the briefing with the fabulous Arlene Foster. But before that, we're going to get the very cold weather.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update. Not much rain around this weekend, not a huge amount of sunshine either. It will be fairly cloudy, but for most of us it'll be a bit warmer than it has been for much of this week. Here's the reason for the dry weather, a big area of high pressure. But notice the isobars closely packed together across the north. It is very windy out there at the moment, and this weather front is still bringing some outbreaks of rain to the highlands of Scotland. That'll last for much of the evening. Still very gusty as well over northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. The winds will slowly ease through the night. Further south, the winds are light. We could see a bit of mist and fog, but generally this cloud keeping the temperatures up well above freezing. We'll start the weekend at some 6s and 7s for most. So, as I said, much milder than many a morning has been this week. It will be a fairly grey day tomorrow, lots of cloud. We may continue to see some light rain and drizzle here and there, the hills of Wales, some western coasts, the highlands of Scotland, but for most it will be dry. And we should see something a bit brighter as well as the day goes on, the cloud breaking a little bit to reveal a little bit of blue sky here and there. And it will be quite mild for February, 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 degrees.